The 536th edition of the Four Corners podcast starts right now.
This is the Four Corners podcast.
And that could make a difference. Lawson at the buzzer. Got it! Maybe not. Ty Lawson wins it at the buzzer.
Deep three. And Green rips down the rebound in traffic. 4-on-1.
What a great job. What a terrific job in transition. I mean, you couldn't plan that any better as a coach.
Gets the roll. Here we go. Page has it. Carolina down one. 84-83. Page into the front court with 4 seconds. Page to the rim. Got it! He got it! 9/10 of a second to go. Inbounds. Washington gets it to Warren. His full court shot. No good. Marcus Page baby. Does it for the Tar Heels. Carolina wins it.
Don't force it if you're Goss.
Comes in. Blocked by Meeks. Buried up ahead to Jackson. And he tucks it down for the 5-point lead. Matthews off the mark. And this year, the confetti is going to fall for North Carolina. They're not going to be denied this time. Inside 30 overall. Love, top of the key. Oh! Big time delivery.
Here are your hosts, Josh Marlowe and Anthony Pagnotta.
Hello and welcome into another live edition of the Four Corners podcast. We are powered by Carolina Electrical Services. Josh and Anthony here with you on a Tuesday night, a busy day for Carolina basketball as they lose their first two players to the transfer portal, two guys that we talked about last night when we did the Will They Stay, Will They Go podcast. And these were two guys that we ultimately expected to enter the portal and departure from the program. So no big surprise, but we're here to talk about those two departures and then talk about another player that Carolina is expressing interest in via the transfer portal. So, a lot of news around the program right now, and that's what you expect with the portal officially open and Carolina basketball officially in full offseason mode as Hubert Davis, along with new GM Jim Tanner, are trying to really reload this roster so this team can be playing this time next year as opposed to being home from the NCAA tournament. Before we talk about all the news and notes around the program, we start every edition of the pod, as we always do, with the pod thought of the day. We go to Gail Sheehy for today's pod thought, and that thought is, quote, "If we don't change, we don't grow. If we don't grow, we aren't really living." I wanted to find a quote that really stressed the changes that Carolina basketball is currently experiencing and undergoing, and something that I think we tried to talk about back when Hubert first made the comments about the GM being a necessity, and then of course they made that hire. All of these changes are to benefit the program. It's odd seeing a front office be put in place the way that Carolina is installing a front office, but if you want to compete at the highest level and you want to run like a major program, then that's what's required. And Carolina was behind the eight ball. They were a little bit arrogant, thinking they didn't have to adapt to the modern style of the game with the success they had in year one in the portal era with Hubert Davis at the helm, reaching the national title game. But if you don't adapt, you die. Not even you get left behind. It's just that you flat out die. And so, Carolina was a little bit slow making these changes, putting a GM in place, hiring the front office staff that they're going to put in place. But this is a necessity. And if Carolina wins and wins at a high level next year, I think for a lot of these old school Carolina fans that don't like the portal, they don't like the NIL, well, then they'll come around to it, because those are the people that, quite frankly, are doing the majority of the complaining. And they're the ones that are upset with where Carolina basketball is at in terms of, not winning in the way that they're used to winning over the course of their lifetime. So I'm always trying to find a pod thought that's intentional to what we're talking about. College athletics is an ever-changing landscape. Carolina basketball has continued to look more and more different than what we've grown up seeing it become. But this evolution is necessary if this program wants to remain among the nation's elite.
Yeah, I mean, it's really that simple. If Carolina is going to be one of the top teams in the country, then they have to do the things that the top teams in the country are doing. And this year was unacceptable, right, guys? I mean, you guys were the ones that were on here saying that to us. And so if it's unacceptable, then you've got to do something to change it. And unfortunately, that means cutting ties with guys that you may like. There are some guys that I think it's honestly going to be really tough to say goodbye to, but that might be the way that you have to do it. So I think that's kind of what you're seeing today is that, one of the guys I think we knew regardless, he was going to be in the portal. And, I think this is just the nature of the beast when it comes to what we're dealing with today. There's a good chance that he was told, look, you need to go into the portal. We are going to find someone different. We need that scholarship freed up. The other guy, I think that might have been a little bit different. I think that was one that the staff probably wrestled back and forth with. They probably had some, spirited debates about whether or not they should keep him on the roster. Like I would assume there will be a lot of people in Tar Heel Nation that will do that continually throughout the next couple of days because we've been seeing it today. The thing is that you shouldn't be celebrating today. I know there are a lot of people that are happy about the fact that Carolina is putting these guys into the portal, that they believe that this is the best thing for Carolina basketball. But more so, it just feels like, there are a lot of people that are just happy that these kids failed and that we can finally get rid of them. So, I mean, to me, I don't understand why today is so celebratory. Like, I hate the fact that Jaylen Washington got injured and never really seemed to turn into the player that we thought he was going to be. I hate that Elliot Cadeau wasn't the guy that we thought we were getting out of high school, even though he started to find his groove just a little bit towards the end of his time in Chapel Hill. That's why, to me, I don't think you should be over the moon about this. But at the same time, I understand where some Tar Heel fans are coming from and feeling like this is the right move and this is ultimately what has to happen.
Yeah, let's go ahead and dive right into those two guys that entered the portal. If you don't know by now, point guard Elliot Cadeau and big man Jaylen Washington are set to depart from the program. We'll start with Cadeau. He was the first guy to enter the portal this afternoon. This is coming off a up and down sophomore year where he averaged over 9 points per game, over 6 assists per game. But along with those 6 assists, he did average over 3 turnovers. And this is a kid that really struggled with confidence, really struggled with just having good body language on the court. There wasn't a player, I think, in the country that got more phantom fouls called against him than Elliot Cadeau. You're talking about a guy that was virtually in foul trouble in every meaningful game Carolina played in at some point this season. And being, in the building for the ACC tournament where he got in foul trouble, I think it was in the Wake Forest and the Duke games, there were calls that just simply were not fouls. But the whistle went his way, and as a young player, he really struggled to overcome that. And I think it's important to remember two things about Elliot Cadeau. I think our expectation for him was exceeded the reality of the situation when he reclassified to join the program a year ago. And I was having a conversation with our good friend of the show, Nada Edwards, earlier today, who is in favor of these two guys leaving the program and loves the fact that Hubert had these hard conversations and is, all but flushing them out. But it's like I told him, as frustrating as Cadeau was this past year and even at times last year, Carolina doesn't win the ACC regular season title without Elliot Cadeau. He was a big part of that team because he just had to run the offense. He didn't have to make shots. He didn't have to make a lot of big-time plays. This year, you expected more from him because there wasn't a Cormac Ryan. There wasn't a Harrison Ingram or an Armando Bacot on the roster. The team was going to be more guard-oriented. It was going to be more perimeter-oriented. And, he did improve his three-point shooting, but not to the level that you needed it to be. And so I think it's important to remember while he struggled this year and was, I think, a big part of why this team did not have the type of success we wanted them to have, he was a big part of why this team was successful a year ago, which kind of makes his departure all the more complex because I was in favor of retaining him if Carolina got bigger around him. Like, I think if you put him in the right system with the right personnel, I saw Joey Powell tweet this out. He does a great job of covering the program for Inside Carolina. Like, you put him like in an Alabama system where you're just running up and down the court and you're playing in a lot of pick and rolls and you've got a legitimate big man that can catch those pocket passes that, Ben Allen, Luba, and Jaylen Washington could not catch the majority of the season, then Elliot Cadeau can be a big-time player. And so, I think while it's understandable while Carolina is moving on, this will be a hard pill to swallow if he does go somewhere else and thrives, which I do think is in the cards for him. There's some guys that when they transfer, they're not going to go somewhere else and be a difference maker. I don't look at that like Elliot Cadeau. I think Elliot Cadeau could transfer somewhere at the power conference level who's got a better supporting cast than what he was given this past year and be the type of player that, he was expected to be at Carolina. And, I think right now it's hard to envision a path back for him to the program. This feels very mutual. This feels very much like he was ready to move on considering he's entering the portal with the no contact tag. But from the intel that I've been gathering, it felt like Carolina was very much wanting to move on from him as well. So, I think the fan base is kind of divided how to feel about him because there were some struggles there, but this is an immense talent that's leaving your program as he was a former 5-star prospect that reclassified and played a big role on last year's team, which won an ACC regular season title and was a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament.
One thing to classify real quickly, or more clarify, when you have the no contact, that is something that is basically do not contact the player. It can mean contact an agent. So that does not mean that his recruitment is not open. There is still ways that you can contact him. It doesn't mean that he has a school that he's locked in on. That's what it used to mean. But now that's not necessarily what it means. But in terms of the player, I mean, dude, it's just probably the most complex player that you could have because there were moments where he looked like a 5-star. You see some of the games down the stretch of the season, the way that he was sharing the basketball, that's what you thought you were getting. That was the comparisons to Kendall Marshall that we made over and over again when he was coming out of the high school level. We thought that was there for him. But one thing that was never there for him, that was there at the high school level, was the scoring touch. It was never there consistently. And so that's a position where moving forward, you've got to be able to score the ball out of that spot. You're not going to have RJ Davis. And there are some people who are morons that believe that RJ Davis being gone is the key to unlocking this backcourt, and all of a sudden all these guys are going to play great. Let me tell you, that's not what is going to happen. All of a sudden, Elliot Cadeau is not going to turn into a guy that averages 20 a game and is lighting it up. That was not the guy that was holding Elliot Cadeau back. Biggest thing holding Elliot Cadeau back is that he was a dude that simply had zero confidence in himself. Every time that it felt like he was starting to become a confident player, there was always an off game that would throw him right back into being the guy that was unsure of himself, who couldn't shoot the ball consistently enough from the outside to really be much of a threat. And those two things right there, that is the key to setting yourself up for failure as a guard. When you can't stretch the floor as a guard, when you can't make perimeter jump shots and you're not confident in yourself, there's really just nothing that you can do. And I think, honestly, it really comes down to he's got to figure that out himself. Somebody says it's coaching. No, it's not. It's not coaching. There's nothing you can do what are you supposed to do? I'm assuming that Hubert was very supportive of him. He could also be a guy that, was very hard on him. And, potentially that, would have been a way that it would work. It's not. It's just that he is simply a guy that is not responding at Carolina. He needs to go somewhere else and get a fresh start. Personally, I think for him, the best move in a lot of the schools that we've seen that have reached out to him or schools that he's been linked to, it's schools that are close to home. I think that's probably where he needs to be because that's where he's going to be most comfortable, is somewhere close to New Jersey. So I would not be shocked if that's where he lands. But I can see the argument why people want to keep him around. The thing that I would say is if you want to keep him around, then that means you want to say goodbye to Seth Trimble. So you can't have both. It's one or the other. You're not keeping both guys because one of them is going to have to be a starter at some point or else they're not sticking around. So,
yeah, I'll definitely push back on that. I think you can have both.
Trimble's not coming back if he's not a starter. If you don't tell him you are a starter, he will go to Wisconsin and play for the Badgers, who will tell him you are going to be a starter here.
Said who?
I mean, we know that he went into the portal last year. He wanted to be a starter this past season, and you don't think that's going to be even more so this year? He's the only guy that's going to be returning in that backcourt more than likely. I would be stunned at this point if Ian Jackson is coming back with some of the things that we've heard about him. And also, he probably believes what we believe when we talked about him last night on the podcast, where we said he is the guy that is the biggest leader for this team. So if you're going to play him starter-like minutes, you're going to be playing him at the 2-guard spot. You are not playing him at the 3 because this team needs size. That's the only way they're going to be able to win games moving forward is with size. And so I think in order to do that, that means you're going to have to part ways with one of these two guys. And I think that, honestly, they probably made the right decision. You need to go out and find a point guard that can score the ball at a high rate. You need a guy that can average 16 to 20 points anywhere in that range. That is not Elliot Cadeau. That is never going to be Elliot Cadeau. And that's fine. He doesn't have to be that guy, but that's not what Carolina needs, not with this system that they're running right now.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember and not put words in Trimble's mouth. When he decided he wanted to return, he signed an NIL. Like, does he want to get the bag? Absolutely. Every player does. But he didn't mention that he had to be a starter because I think he proved down the stretch he was a big part of what Carolina did and did so coming off the bench. Everybody would love to start. There are some players that aren't built to start, but there could be impactful players coming off the bench, and I think Seth Trimble could be that guy because, quite frankly, unless his jump shot improves, as good as he is defensively, it's going to be hard to justify starting him anyway because you can't really start a guy that shoots the ball or shot the ball as poorly as he did this past season. So you can have both. It feels like they're choosing one or the other because they have different plans for the backcourt to begin with. Whether it's, a lot of people are going to bring up the New Mexico guard or, there's going to be other guys that enter the portal along the way. But Carolina can have both if they want to have both. I think they're choosing not to, but not because Seth Trimble is giving them some sort of ultimatum, because I envision Trimble being back next year. I also envision a world where Seth Trimble comes off the bench, but is a part of your closing lineup, is a part of your lineup that is on the floor at the Final Four time out of a close game, which is the most important thing. Starting is very overrated. It's the minutes and the impact you have on winning. Seth Trimble played a lot of minutes. He impacted winning while coming off the bench.
Well, you're not going to get a guy that plays the 2-guard out of the portal if you're playing him 27 to 30 minutes a game. It's just not going to happen. No one's coming here to play 10 to 13 minutes.
Well, you understand that you can play multiple guys at the same time. Like, Carolina's still going to play multiple, 3-guard lineups next year. Like, they're not going to.
Not if they want to win.
So now you just can't win playing with three. So now you just can't win playing with 3 guards, a forward, and a big. That's impossible. Not this team. Not this team, unless you're going to get better rebounders, because guys are just simply too small. Like, if you get Isaac McNeely can't rebound.
So, I mean, he averaged like what? I think it was like 2 and 2.9 a game or something like that.
That was at Virginia, where rebounding isn't as stressed as it's going to be stressed at Carolina.
I mean, your guards proved to you this year that they're not going to be able to rebound you to being one of the better teams in the country and in rebounding. And that's
your second best rebounder was a guard.
Yeah. And look at where it got you. You need to have, it needs to be a lineup that is much bigger and that has success rebounding. And in order to do that, you simply have to have bigger guys. So you've got to have guys, your 3 most of the time has to be 6'6" or bigger. You cannot play that small unless your guards are going to go nuts. And I'm talking about you got to have a guy that averages at least 5.5 a game or more than that. At 6'4", like that's a challenge for Seth Trimble. I just don't know if that's necessarily the best part of his game. And Carolina, they need a closing lineup that has say 3 guys on the floor that are at least 6'6", 2 guys on the floor that are at least 6'9". And I just, to me, I don't think, and it doesn't matter because they're making the choice. Cadeau is gone and he's not coming back. And that's the right move for Carolina. So they are getting a refresh there, but I personally don't think that both of them were going to work together this coming season, because that would be 2 of your 3 guards that simply cannot shoot the ball consistently from the outside, that are going to want to play starter-like minutes. And, I mean, unless you're going to lie to these guys and tell them in the offseason, yeah, we're going to do that, and then bring someone in and basically force their hand to stay on the roster, I don't think it was going to work out. And so I think they made the move.
Yeah, I think this is very much, mutual for both. And I think you're hoping it's beneficial for both. I'll be interested to see where Cadeau lands. There's some people that, I've seen St. John's mentioned. I don't know if that kid can play for Rick Pitino. I don't. And that's not a knock on Elliot Cadeau as much as it is not. I mean, there's only a handful of players that could play for Rick Pitino because he's a guy that is very demanding of his players. Syracuse could very well be up in an option for him as well. Maybe he goes to Seton Hall, who knows? But I want to see him go somewhere and thrive where his talent can be on display. And I think what really killed him this year was the fact that Carolina's roster in totality was as small and as tiny as it was. Like, I think if Carolina had the legitimate size that you expect Carolina to have, and you had big men that had hands, I don't think we're sitting here as frustrated with him as we were the majority of the season. Yes, there were some errant passes. There were some bad decisions. There's no denying that. But you could argue that one of his turnovers that he had probably averaged per game was on a pocket pass to a big man, that if that big man's Armando Bacot, he's catching the ball, and whether he's scoring or not is to be determined, but he's not fumbling it and turning it over and letting the team run down the other way with it for an easy bucket. So we'll be interested to see where Cadeau goes. And I know I can speak for both of us saying that we wish him the best of luck in his future basketball endeavors. Let's move on to the other guy that's in the portal, Jaylen Washington, the junior big man, entered the portal. It was about 10 to 15 minutes after Cadeau made his decision, or once Cadeau's decision to transfer was made public, we got the news about Jaylen Washington. Not a surprise here. He was one that we talked about last night that we were the most confident in, that he would not be back in Chapel Hill for his senior season. He averaged over 5 points and 4 rebounds. You go back to, if you listen to the podcast throughout the duration of the year, we really looked at that state game in Raleigh back in January as a potential turning point for him, where he quite literally won Carolina the game. He had the game-winning dunk on a great pass from Elliot Cadeau and had the game-sealing block. And it was him as much as anybody, and Cadeau as well, that were taunting the state fans and let it be known that they came into the building and beat them once again. It never materialized. He had a great game against Boston College, scored 18 points off the bench, got hurt, though, late in the game. And from really that point on, was never really the difference maker that he was exposed, that we needed him to be, and that he wanted to be. I think this is one where injuries, I think, played a major role, and him just never getting where we thought he was going to get. He was pretty highly touted coming out of, when he first committed to Carolina, and was supposed to be in that next lineage of bigs. And then he got the knee injury that, basically took him away from his freshman year. Remember, he played a game at Virginia in his freshman season where he played great in the first half. He got beat up in the second half. But you saw the potential. You saw what he could become. But that guy just never materialized. And I think, credit Carolina for staying committed to him, because I think a lot of schools in this day and age would have dumped the scholarship and would have went and found someone else to help them, be a difference maker on the roster. That's not the way that Carolina does things, and you like to see that in this new day and age. But I also don't think his lack of success is 100% his fault either. Like, I look at Jaylen Washington, and he's the reason why I say, if Hubert Davis wants to go find a new man to coach the bigs, I'm okay with that, because there was more talent there than I think Sean May was able to get out of. And there was some stuff where I don't know if maybe Carolina used him as well as they could have used him as well. So not surprised that Jaylen Washington is gone. He did grow, I think, incredibly frustrating down the stretch, because you could just tell, man, he was getting bodied and bullied against some of these superior bigs he had to go up against in the back half of the season. So I think this could be a guy, could maybe play at the power conference level. I said it last night. Could he be an ACC big? He can be. He's not a North Carolina big. And I think this staff is hell-bent on getting in big men that look the part of what we're used to seeing play the center spot at UNC.
Yeah, again, the thing that you saw from him against teams like Virginia, like Boston College this year, like, that stuff just never materialized. You really thought that he was going to be a guy that eventually it would translate with him. And this offseason, we talked so much about how we were confident that this was going to be the year that he made a jump. He just needed a little more playing time. He needed that one offseason, and he needed to be told, hey, look, you're the starter. You're the guy that we're relying on. We thought he would respond to that. He never did. And unfortunately for him, it's probably going to signify the end of his time as a power conference player. I think he's probably going to be suited best to go down to the mid-major level. And look, I think he can certainly succeed down there. I would love to see him sort of develop that shot a little bit more, become a guy that can stretch the floor, because that was one of the other things that we talked about with him. We said, okay, this is a guy that is finally going to be able to stretch the floor out of the 5 spot. We've been talking about it for years. We've wanted to do it. This is something that Hubert wants, where just about every guy on the floor can shoot the ball. And that never materialized either. I mean, he hit I think it was 3 threes the entire season or something like that. So it just the fact that he was never able to build on that frame and become a tougher player inside, it made it almost impossible to keep him, because you need taller guys inside, but you need guys that are physical more than anything, guys that are going to come away with the rebounds no matter what. And that just is not Jaylen Washington. We saw multiple times this year him at a position late in games, leading to important offensive rebounds that result in Carolina getting beat. The game against Ole Miss was just that would signify the end. We said it last night when you were getting bodied the way that you were by Malik Dia. And that's not saying that Malik Dia isn't a good player. But when you're getting pushed back physically, you're getting pushed in midair while you're going up to contest a shot against them, there's really just nothing that you can do. And the thing is that you're not, a guy that people are bringing up here is if Carolina was to go after Magoon Gwath. Magoon Gwath is a very slender type of player. But here's the thing about him. He is a slender player who averaged 2.6 blocks per game this year. So he was doing an unbelievable job of sealing the rim. Jaylen Washington had moments where he showed you that ability, but it just wasn't consistent. There was nothing about his game that was consistent. He would flash, and then it would immediately go back to being a guy that would contribute a few points off the bench for you, wouldn't really be able to give you the quality rebounding that you needed, and basically became unplayable at certain times this year where you were saying, look, especially with the way that Vin Allen-Lubin is playing, you're probably a guy that we're going to play maybe 10 minutes, 13 minutes a night, somewhere in that range. I just don't think that's ultimately what Carolina needs. They need someone that is 7 foot like he is, but that can be a starter at that 5 spot. And I feel like they need the scholarship a little bit more than they needed to keep Jaylen Washington around.
Well, I mean, look, with the way that Carolina threw themselves after every big man in the portal a year ago, this was, once it became evident that Jaylen Washington was not that guy, I mean, we knew this was coming back early in the non-conference season when he just never settled into being that 5 guy that this team wanted and this team needed. And I said it all year long. I thought that was the cardinal sin for this group this year, was that they never had that 5 spot solidified until the back half of the year. I think they wanted it to be Jaylen Washington and made a lot of sense. I think if you would have gotten the version of Ben Allen-Lubin you got down the end of the regular season from the start of the year, I think Carolina has a completely different year. Like, I don't think Carolina's a bubble team in the sense of they're sweating it out on Selection Sunday. But that's not what happened. Like, Carolina was wanting to go the Jaylen Washington route, and it made a lot of sense because there was more ability there offensively, but he just did not prove out to be the bigger big man. It took them a little too long to figure that out, make that switch. And thankfully they were able to do enough down the stretch to where they at least can make the tournament. But, him not being the guy was, I think, one of the early nails in the coffin for this year. But we should have been more open to that with the way they went after every big man in the portal just a year ago. So those are the first 2 guys to enter the portal. We would imagine Cade Tyson would be transferring at some point. We have to wait and see if that becomes official. And then probably the other 2 names to monitor will be really from a transfer portal decision would probably be Ian Jackson, because I think we're all in agreement that if Drake Powell leaves the programs because Drake Powell is going pro and not transferring somewhere else to play college basketball. But the good news is that not only, while Carolina lost 2 players to the portal, you could tell that this front office and this coaching staff, they're very interested and they're hitting the ground running to start recruiting guys out of the portal to add talent and depth to the roster for the upcoming season. Last time we talked about them talking to Isaac McNeely, the Virginia transfer who led the ACC in 3-point shooting this past year at 42%. Today they turned their attention to a 6'9" forward, Malik Renaud, who is coming off, who's played 3 seasons for the Indiana Hoosiers. Last year he averaged 15.4 points per game, 6 rebounds, shot 56% from the field. This past year, he averaged 13.3 points per game, 5.5 rebounds, and shot 55% from the field. The one thing to note is the 3-point shooting is not there. He is a career 26% 3-point shooter, but one thing Carolina missed this year was just consistent scoring at the 4 spot, if you will. They tried playing a 4-guard lineup. So even though you had a 4-man there, that 4-man was a guard. You had Drake Powell there, but you had Drake Powell out of position. It wasn't really until Jalen Withers showed up on the scene the last 10 games of the regular season before all of a sudden Carolina was getting scoring from its 4-man. Now, Jalen Withers was more of a stretch 4 with his ability to shoot the 3 ball, but could also get to the glass and score in second chance opportunities. So this is not the big man that Carolina is looking for, that this roster needs. But Malik Reneau, I think, could be a guy that if this staff gets really serious about, could really fill a hole and a void that was on this year's roster, because Carolina just did not have a consistent score at that 4 spot. And that put a lot of pressure on these guards to score the majority of the time. And then when that did not happen, it usually spelled trouble and doom for Carolina.
Yeah, this is Jalen Withers' replacement, but it's a guy that doesn't play exactly like Jalen Withers plays. So you have to figure out, are you okay with a guy that's coming in here that isn't necessarily going to be able to score the ball from 3 that plays the 4 spot? I think he can be, because we've seen this year, one of the things we've talked about is that we would not mind getting back to the Roy Williams way of playing basketball. We would not mind going back to a 2 big lineup. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to play 2 7-footers, but you would really like to have, some size inside, 2 guys that can play with the back to the basket game, because we've seen that's exactly what teams like Florida, teams like Michigan have been able to do, and they've done it at a high level. I think that should be the goal for Carolina this offseason if they can make it happen. Malik Reneau is a guy that can help you get there. I think he's the perfect type of gap filler for a guy like Caleb Wilson. That gives Caleb Wilson a little bit of time to sort of settle into the college game. Hey, if he's not ready to start the season, well, you got Malik Reneau, who, started every game 2 years ago, started 19 of the 26 games that he played in this year. He's capable of being your starter, of being the guy that can get buckets inside. And then after that, you've got a guy in Caleb Wilson at 6'9" who will be able to stretch the floor, who will be more of the traditional 4 that you're looking for in this system. So I really think that Malik Reneau would be a great fit. I think he'd be, he'd understand what his role is on this team. And if he does, then, he's the perfect type of pickup. I just think that the one thing that you have to realize, because I've seen it already, there are people here that are saying it, this is not the big man that Carolina is going after. This is not a guy that's playing the 5. If you play him at the 5, it's because you're trying to throw out alternate lineups. There is no way that this is the guy that's starting there, because, first of all, at that rate, you just keep Vin Allen Lubin, because he's basically the same exact player as Vin Allen Lubin. And I think that's still, way too little size for you on the inside. He's not the greatest rebounder. I mean, he averages 5.5 a game. Now, keep in mind, that is in 23 minutes. But you go back to last year where he averaged 28 minutes a game, still only 6 rebounds per game. So that's not exactly what you're looking for from a big man on the inside that's going to play that 5 spot. So I do think that this is someone that they, are interested in, probably as a filler of that Jalen Withers role, but it's not the guy that's going to take over as the big man. So please do not panic and think this is the guy they're targeting.
Yeah, but I think you got to look at him and see the value and what he can bring. You're talking about a guy that averaged over double-digit points per game at the Big Ten level and did so very efficiently, shooting 56% from the field last year, 55% from the field this last season. Carolina's offense has to become more efficient. You have to get guys that can score the ball and not be shooting in the low 40 percentile. You got to have guys that can shoot it the way that he shot it. So, I mentioned it last night when we were talking about the whole 2 big things. Multiple teams in the country that are still playing basketball in Sweet 16 play with 2 bigs. Auburn does it. Florida does it. Michigan does it. Michigan State does it. And so, yes, we live in an era where the 3 ball is as prominent as it's ever been. Everybody wants to have as much floor spacing as possible, but the college game is different. The floor is a little bit more compressed than it is at the NBA level, and so if you figure out how to play with two bigs, then you can do so. You can run some high-low stuff. I mean, I thought that was something that if Carolina would have implemented that this year with Jaylen Washington or Jalen Withers earlier, Vin Allen Lubin, I think, is such a good sealer where he can get on the low block and you can put Reneau at the foul line and he could just dump the ball into Lubin, who's either going to lay it up, dunk it, or draw a foul, or convert for an and one opportunity. So, and I think you want to add more lineup flexibility to where you're not just playing the same style every time with every lineup on the court. Like you want to be able to play different styles of basketball. And I think that's something that Renaud could bring. And then, as you mentioned, the beauty of what Caleb Wilson was going to bring to this roster is, unlike Drake Powell, that guy can play the 3 or the 4 and be comfortable. Powell's a 3-man. Carolina tried to make him into a 4-man. And give the kid credit, man. He fought to make it work. But you could tell that once he got moved up to the 3, he was really a lot more comfortable, was playing at a much higher level, whereas Wilson can play both. He can be that tweener that can play the 3 or the 4. So you can run lineups with Wilson at the 3, Renaud at the 4. But then if you want to move Wilson down to the 4, well, now you're playing 4 around 1. You become more open. You've got better floor spacing. You got more. You're more dynamic than what you would be with Renaud at the 4. So I think that's also something Carolina needs to be intentional about, is adding more lineup flexibility to its roster, as opposed to this is the way we're going to play no matter who's on the floor at any point in time. So, there's a lot of schools that have already expressed interest in him from the power conference level. So I think this is going to be one where we're going to figure out, does having that, does Jim Tanner prove to be a difference maker in Carolina's potential pursuit of him, with just having those relationships with agents, maybe figuring out how to structure a contract that takes care of him financially, so on and so forth. I think the most important thing that you need to look at when you look at who the guys Carolina is targeting out of the portal, there's an early theme that's developing, and I think it's what Carolina fans want. With McNeely and now Renaud, these are guys that are, for their positions, have legitimate size, and they're coming from the power conference level. I think that's something Carolina fans really want to see Hubert Davis do this past offseason, or this offseason, after the way that they swung and missed on K. Tyson, where I think you're kind of turned off from going to the group of 5 or the mid-major route and trying to have them, adapt to the power conference level at a school like Carolina that's going to play a tough non-conference schedule in the country. And so far they've done that. I think one of the biggest reasons why they're moving on from Cadeau is because they just want to be bigger all around in the backcourt. And McNeely, I think, is 6'3", 6'4". That's a significant size advantage in the backcourt. And then Renaud, Withers was 6'10", so you're 6'9", but you're not recruiting someone small to play that position. And so, a lot of talk this past year was how small Carolina was and why that hindered them in some of the big games that they got beat in the non-conference season. And then, of course, with some of the losses in conference play, I don't think it's coincidence that early on, Hubert Davis, Jim Tanner, they're targeting big players from the power conference level to potentially add to the roster for the 2025-2026 season.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think power conference guys are the main thing that they're looking for. They want guys that have been there, that have done that. You're also seeing that early on, and again, it's 2 guys that they've been linked to. As of right now, officially, we don't know if they haven't officially been linked to Magoon Gwath. That's a guy that we saw today. Some of the schools that have been linked to him, Carolina's not on the list. Now, it doesn't mean that they're not eventually going to be on the list, or that maybe they haven't contacted him. It's just not public. But one thing that you are seeing is that they want veteran guys too. They want guys that have experience in these power conference and have been there for a while. So yeah, we need to see sustained success. It's not, you have one great year and all of a sudden we're going to take a risk on you. That's really what it was with Cade Tyson. Was he had the one great season and Carolina was like, okay, we're going after him. We're going to see if he fits what we want to do. No, McNeely's a guy that's played in this conference. He's been successful since the minute that he stepped on campus. Renaud, a guy that, took a little bit of time, wasn't nearly as effective in his freshman season, but the last 2 years has been very, very effective for Indiana, one of their better scorers. So I think those are 2 guys that Carolina, those are 2 of the biggest fish that are out there too. So you're seeing Carolina, they're saying, look, we're taking big swings here. We are going after the biggest and the best in the portal. And so what that tells me is that they feel confident in where their NIL collective is. We have no idea. Ricardo Bell asks us here, how much NIL money do we have? Sir, if we knew that, we would certainly not be working the jobs that we do. We would have much more lucrative jobs because we would be insiders. We are not insiders, so we can't tell you how much money they have. I don't think anybody that covers the program can tell you how much money they have. But I do think that they feel confident with where this NIL collective is, that they are going after some of the biggest names that are already in the portal. So I think this is great. I think both of these guys that they have been linked to, I could see them having a role on this team and being successful for this team. So I think, hopefully we'll get some more news here as we go along. But the other thing is that people may say, well, why haven't they targeted a big? Why haven't they gone after a guy that maybe can score the ball at a high level? Like Dent, the guy who entered the transfer portal from New Mexico. Well, first of all, he just entered today. So let's take a minute, wait and see if Carolina reaches out to him. Also, guys, it's still early. Someone put it up earlier today. After the first week of the transfer portal, what the transfer portal rankings looked like in terms of the top players. They did then a week later, the second week of the transfer portal being open, and you saw just how many big names and guys that are massive contributors ended up entering the transfer portal in that second week. And all of a sudden, you're talking about some of the best players in the country being available. Let's let the tournament end here. And then we'll evaluate some of the guys that Carolina has been going after and see whether or not we should be panicking. I don't think that we will be, because I think this group is going to be uber aggressive, as they're already showing you so far with some of the big targets that are out there.
Yeah, this is the one positive to being home this time of the year, is that you can really evaluate the portal and get a good head start on trying to to add talent, to add depth to your roster. So, obviously we wish we were still playing, and that's going to be the expectation this time next year, is that Carolina is still dancing, but also going ahead and navigating the early portal entries as well. But this is what Carolina did 2 years ago when they missed a tournament, chose not to go to the NIT, and is while they were able to land the transfers that they were able to land. And those guys had the impact that they had on the program a year ago. Hubert Davis is hoping to do that once again this offseason in hopes of establishing a program that's going to have long-term, sustained success, which is what we expect at a program like UNC. With that, guys, it is going to wrap up this edition of the podcast. Before we let you go, we encourage you to visit our website. That's HeelToughBlog.com. All the news today can be found on the website. Individual articles about Cadeau entering the portal, Jaylen Washington in the portal, and Carolina expressing interest in the Indiana transfer Malik Renault can all be found on the website. Anthony has you covered with the latest notes around some Tar Heel football recruiting as well. So we really encourage you to visit the website every single morning, afternoon, and evening. This time of the year, you can expect 1 to 2 articles going up on the site per day covering both programs. So get to the website. That way you're staying informed on the latest with Carolina basketball and Tar Heel football. As for the podcast, you guys know where to find us. Every major podcasting platform. Simply search the Four Corners Podcast and we will pop up. There, we encourage you guys to rate, review, and subscribe. That way you don't miss any editions of the show throughout the basketball off season. If a player enters the portal, there will be a podcast about it. If Carolina contacts a high-profile transfer, there's going to be a podcast about it. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. That way you don't miss any of our coverage this year of a pivotal offseason in Chapel Hill. So with that, guys, it is going to wrap up this edition of the show. I do want to thank Anthony once again for hosting with me. We want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.